Well, let's talk now about vitamin K. There is a 35% deficiency of this vitamin. It is especially found in green leafy vegetables. It also allows for photosynthesis, which is why it is abundant in vegetables. And K2, especially in fermented foods. In this case, it is natto, which is a Japanese fermented soybean. But the intestine also produces K2. K2 is mainly related to coagulation processes and also to removing excess calcium that may be in the arteries. It allows calcium to be located in the places where it should be. Well, regarding studies, for example, and dosages, here you have them. There is still not much clarity. There is a quite broad range in vitamin K. As you can see, for example, in lactating or pregnant women, it is said to be 70 micrograms of vitamin K2, and it varies according to age. So, what happens if we do not consume green leafy vegetables? If our gut flora is altered for many reasons, such as antibiotics, then we will not have that vitamin that benefits the health of our arteries. It will allow calcium to be located where it should be, that is, in the bones and not in other inappropriate places. So, as I mentioned, it has to do with coagulation. Especially, K1 is the one that is more related to coagulation. K2 is more related to arterial health, ensuring that calcium is located where it should be. And what vitamin K does is activate proteins that are in the arterial walls that remove calcium from where it should not be in the plaques. So many problems of arteriosclerosis are not so much due to a lack of omegas, but because we do not have vitamin K. Here, in this study, for example, it discusses the theory that minerals are reserved for moments, let's say, immediate survival. This is a theory called triage, which has been published for several years, since 2009. And what it does is that the body will reserve vitamin K for what is vital, which is coagulation. But everything related to vitamin K for arterial health, well, there won't be enough. It won't be administered directly. What is the solution then for magnesium vitamin K? Well, one is supplementation, and another is to increase the consumption of green leafy products, whether in the form of smoothies, ideally from good quality products, hopefully organic, as those lands theoretically have more minerals due to the type of fertilization they undergo. But even so, sometimes it is difficult. So, as I mentioned about changing habits, and by default, I at least recommend it regularly, magnesium is one of the ones I recommend the most. Well, we normally associate vitamin D with calcium. As we know, vitamin D is responsible for absorbing calcium from the intestine when we consume it so that it passes into the blood and to the bones. If we don't have vitamin D, then we won't have it. Calcium will continue straight through and will not be absorbed. But it is not only related to that, it is also connected to immunity, inflammation, and many processes that we will detail, as well as the incidence of degenerative diseases. And there is already too much evidence. There are even 31 studies that have shown that vitamin D deficiency is related to one of the highest causes of death for different reasons, not only at the cardiovascular level. Well, here in this study they discuss the issue of the pandemic, whether there is really a vitamin D pandemic, and indeed there is, especially in places where there is not much light. And what is causing the lack of vitamin D? Well, it is that we have moved too far away from the sun. We are always working in places where light does not reach, or if the light comes through glass, where UV rays are filtered, which are really the ones that activate vitamin D. On the other hand, as you will see, the metabolism of vitamin D is based on cholesterol. In other words, cholesterol is also necessary. Logically, very high cholesterol is not good, but if we do not have enough cholesterol, we cannot produce many hormones. It is vital not only for vitamin D, but also for the brain. So, the metabolism is activated through ultraviolet B rays and converts to the form of vitamin D3, which is cholecalciferol. It can also be obtained through diet, especially Mushrooms have vitamin D, as well as fish and fish oils. And this comes in the form of ergocalciferol, or vitamin D2. D2 requires activation, and it is usually supplemented with D3. Then, this vitamin D goes to the liver, and the liver then activates it. And again, the kidney performs the final metabolic process, which would be calcitriol, which is already a steroid hormone. This one does require medical supervision, calcitriol, since it has a narrow window for toxic doses and lower doses, let's say. So, at the supplement level, we usually give more cholecalciferol or D3, and it is the one we commonly measure in blood as well. So here I was mentioning the types of vitamin D. Remember that D3 is the one that interests us the most in terms of supplementation. And well, what is the ideal therapeutic range? Normally, what has been observed is that between 40 and 60 nanograms per milliliter of vitamin D is when a large number of diseases are avoided. If you are used to requesting vitamin D in the consultation, those who are therapists will see that we often find 15 nanograms, 20, that is very low, that needs to be increased. And normally to increase it, the ideal would be for the person to get more sunlight, but if it's winter, it will be difficult. And the other option is supplementation. With what amount? Studies have shown that for every 1,000 international units of vitamin D3, the blood value increases by 5 nanograms per milliliter, which is very little. If a person comes to you with 15 nanograms UNPO of vitamin D and you want to increase it and you give them 400 international units, which is what most multivitamins contain, it won't be effective directly, so higher doses need to be given. To start, normally the consultation today is 2,000 international units, a safe dose for practically everyone, and it is monitored. Ideally, there should be blood tests in patients, and they should ask their primary care doctors to measure their vitamin D3, and they will be surprised and will see that this could be the cause of intestinal, emotional issues, etc. Well, here is the scientific documentation for you to review in your notes. In this one, for example, from 2014, vitamin D is a risk factor for death from many diseases. That was an observational meta-analysis, which was also randomized, well done. And frankly, we do not understand why this is not being publicized more at the public level, even among primary care doctors. Well, vitamin D is related to 1,000 genes. Genes are that part of DNA that will code for proteins related to metabolic processes, again. So, 5% of these genes are modulated by vitamin D. If we do not have vitamin D, those genes are inactive. And what they do is activate and deactivate genes. So, that regulation is vital, especially to also prevent degenerative processes. Here you also have another study so that you can see, in this one, for example, the influence of vitamin D and the genome, how it is expressed. Well, I am not going to go into details here. Know that vitamin D is related to parathyroid hormone. There is a level between parathyroid hormone and vitamin D. Sometimes, in a nutshell, parathyroid hormone is the one that, if you lack calcium in the blood, takes it from the bone so that there can be calcium in the blood. Calcium in the blood is very important because it regulates processes of cardiac contraction, etc. If there is no calcium, then there can be an arrhythmia or there is too much calcium. So sometimes problems with parathyroid hormone are related to a lack of vitamin D3. It is also related to phosphorus. So in a blood test, if you see altered phosphorus, if you see parathyroid hormone high or very low, you need to consider that there is a problem with vitamin D and it needs to be diagnosed. And there is also a lot of genetic polymorphism in people who already have genetic alterations that prevent them from producing vitamin D or metabolizing it properly. There are even genetic maps being created so that people can know if they are in that group. And especially that group needs to supplement at higher doses. But well, a blood test for vitamin D would be sufficient. At the cellular level, intracellularly, in the nucleus, vitamin D also regulates telomeres. Telomeres are related to longevity. They control how long a cell lives and when it should also die. So, we also depend on that. Processes of premature aging or degenerative alterations could be related to D3. Note that it also requires zinc. We see that there is always, it's like a symphony. We don't just require one mineral, several are always needed in the processes. Well, the effects of vitamin D on the brain, for example, and on the gut. Vitamin D acts on very important receptors, which are TPH1 and TPH2, which metabolize tryptophan to produce serotonin. Remember that serotonin is the neurotransmitter that modulates emotions and many other aspects. Serotonin is also produced in the gut, but the one produced in the gut does not pass to the brain. It is produced independently. So, this vitamin D at the intestinal or peripheral level will activate these TPH1 receptors, and what will serotonin do? It will regulate vascular tone, intestinal motility, and immunomodulation. That is to say, the immune system is also regulated in part or indirectly by vitamin D. Why is that? Because if we do not have vitamin D, this immunomodulation will not occur properly. And at the brain level, if we do not have vitamin D, this TPH2 that converts tryptophan to serotonin in the brain will lead to depression, aggression, and impulsivity issues. We see it today even in children, anxiety, and it has even been linked to other types of psychiatric diseases. So notice, depression in northern countries, in Sweden, in Switzerland, the suicide rate is very high, and it is postulated that this may be one of the factors as well. In fact, they have been supplementing for a long time. Action of vitamin D3 on TPH1 and TPH2 receptors, we already discussed that. Normally, for example, in autistic individuals, there is a lot of serotonin in the gut and very little in the brain. It's curious. And in fact, vitamin D is what does this. It reduces the amount of serotonin in the gut and increases serotonin levels in the brain. And it is what we find in many psychiatric disorders. This can be documented here in this review. So, in autism, it has been observed, it is not the only cause by any means. It is said that there is 30% genetic and 70% that is unknown. It seems to be environmental. But it is postulated that one of the factors, among others, may be vitamin D. Why? Because it has been observed that autistic individuals have lower levels of vitamin D, low levels of serotonin in the brain, but they have high levels of serotonin in the gut. Interestingly, this is what happens when we lack vitamin D. It is also primarily in men. Autism is not as common in women. It turns out that estrogens at the brain level can activate tryptophan to produce serotonin as a protective factor, which would explain why there is more autism in men and not so much in women. It has also been observed that there are antibodies in the mother's blood against the baby's brain, meaning that during pregnancy, vitamin D is vital, because the fetus requires that vitamin D from the mother, and if the mother does not have it, the fetus does not either. And her immunity will cause suddenly, and in fact it has been seen, the mother to generate antibodies against that child's brain. So, imagine at a preventive level, in the course we will have a person, a doctor, who will talk to us about the aspect of pregnancy, the importance of vitamin D. Also, Dr. Chaubert, much of what he has talked about is a world reference in self-medication nutrition. He will comment on this type of studies. Here you see in this graph autism and the amount of vitamin D, what has happened. So, we see that the incidence of autism has increased by up to 600%. Obviously, it has to do in part because there is more awareness. It is also being diagnosed more because it is being looked for more, but not everything can be explained by that. On one hand, there is a deficiency of vitamin D, and the picture is almost similar. Vitamin D has decreased and autism has increased in almost equal proportion. Surely it is not the only factor, there are many more, but it could be one of the factors we could control, at least among those that are not genetic. And this again, documented, you have it here for you to review later. Well, in this metabolism of tryptophan, remember, it is the amino acid from which serotonin and other types of neurotransmitters are produced, and it also requires iron. Again, we have that correlation. During pregnancy, again, Serotonin has a neuromodulatory or neuroconstructive action. If there is no serotonin, those neurons in development do not know where they should differentiate. So abnormal brains are produced. Let's put it that way. Therefore, again, it is vital to measure, at least in pregnant women, the level of vitamin D in the blood. It is very easy. And if it is low, it needs to be replenished. So, autoimmunity. We see many autoimmune processes in the consultation. That is, the immune system attacking itself, especially at the intestinal level. And this leads to many problems. So low vitamin D causes intestinal TPH1. That is the enzyme that, as we mentioned, produces serotonin in the gut to increase. And that leads to more intestinal serotonin, which we also don't want. That serotonin does not pass to the brain. So just because more is produced in the gut, it doesn't mean we have more in the brain. It does not cross the blood-brain barrier. That decrease in T cells also leads to the increase in serotonin, causing regulatory T or immune cells to start decreasing. And also the regulatory ones in the placenta. So, probably many loss issues are related to that, with the immune system not being regulated and producing attacks on the placenta and the fetus. So, prevention, very simple, measure it in the blood and supplement it in adequate doses. Here, for example, in this publication from the Journal of Maternal Health, well, there you have it. In this one, vitamin D status has been correlated with pregnancies that have complications. That is, if it is low, there are more complications in pregnancy. And the level of micronutrients in pregnancy can also predict the future health of the fetus. Now, a relationship between vitamin D and omega-3s. There is a synergy between them. It has been observed that when vitamin D and omega-3s are deficient, there is an increase in attention-related disorders, bipolar disorder, even schizophrenia and impulse control problems, which have been seen to increase. This has also been published. Dr. Rhonda Patrick, an excellent scientist. You can find her in various videos on the internet, has conducted these very interesting studies. So, serotonin modulates memory, also modulates sleep, and additional cognitive skills. So, imagine, if vitamin D and omega-3 are related to that, how good it is that we have them at adequate levels. Here in this graph, we see this is a presynaptic neuron, and this is the postsynaptic neuron. Tryptophan comes in, which is the amino acid I mentioned, and it passes through the neuron. So, this enzyme depends on vitamin D to produce the active form of serotonin, which is 5-hydroxytryptamine. And for it to be released into the synaptic space, it requires EPA, this omega-3 EPA. If we do not have omega-3 EPA, this membrane has a lot of inflammation. What EPA does is reduce inflammation. That will condition it so that it is not released. And if serotonin is not released, then logically, it will not reach the other neuron. And DHA is the one that will allow this other marine omega-3 DHA. What allows is for this membrane of the neuron, postsynaptic, to be adequate, to have proper fluidity, so we require omega-3, EPA, and DHA for the brain to function well and to be able to use serotonin properly. If it is low in vitamin D, then we do not produce significant amounts of active serotonin, 5-hydroxytryptamine, nor is it released, and if we do not have omegas, then they do not function. Therefore, many emotional problems are related to this. It is not the only factor, of course, but it is a factor to consider at a therapeutic level. In the doses of vitamin D, EFSA in 2016 recommends 15 micrograms per day for those over 1 year old. This includes infants, pregnant women, and those from 7 to 11 months at 10 micrograms per day. Maximum tolerable intake is 100 micrograms per day for adults and 50 micrograms for those aged 10 to 17 years, 25 micrograms per day for ages 0 to 1 year. The equivalent is that 1 microgram is 40 international units, so the mnemonic. The maximum dose is 4,000 international Schoen units. That is the limit we can give of vitamin D3, not calcitriol. Remember that. Calcitriol is the steroid hormone, the last one, produced, and is usually synthetic. I personally use 2000 doctors units preventively and associate it with vitamin K2. These two are important because if we have too much vitamin D3, we are absorbing a lot of calcium, but if we lack K2, that calcium can deposit in inappropriate places. So it is good to supplement with both vitamin D and vitamin K